All right. Yesterday was not a very cheery day in here at all. We talked about um, racial violence, racial tension that took place in Georgia and really other places across the South, but we focused on Georgia, of course, because that's where we live. Um, Talked about Mary Turner, and that's where we left off yesterday. We actually talked about Mary Turner and her lynching in 1918, and then again, a lynching that occurred in 1925 um, that involved the Central State Hospital, Miss Amy Oxford and um, Willie Sims. Oxford, of course, was murdered by Sims, and then Sims was taken from the state hospital by a group of men and lynched down in Wilkinson County. Today is not going to be any cheerier, and I apologize for that, but I think it's important that um, we look at everything in our past, not just the things that make us feel good, but the things that should make us um, weep. And, hopefully you experienced a little bit of that yesterday, not because I wanted to see you weep, but because you need to every once in a while. There are things in this life that should make you just weep because they're sad, they're hurtful. 1906, Hoke Smith is running for governor. And Hoke Smith ran, and part of his platform was, I will take away the vote from the black man. He's going to disfranchise black Georgians. There's only one problem with that. He can't do it. He can't change the Constitution of the United States. It would take another constitutional amendment to undo what the 15th Amendment had done. But just to show you how ignorant voters are sometimes, they believed Hoke Smith. And so he is elected governor of Georgia. His platform and just the overall environment at the time created a lot of racial tension. And in September of that year, things kind of came to a head. Atlanta newspapers, for some reason, decided it was a good idea to run articles. I shouldn't call them articles. They were stories that indicated that there were several black men in Atlanta who had assaulted white women. And on the night of September 22nd, after reading those newspaper accounts, a mob of white men went looking for black men to hurt. We'll just use that word, hurt. And they found one, a black messenger who was just working, riding his bicycle, delivering messages, is found and he is murdered. And the result is a race riot, the first and only one in Atlanta history. 4 days of violence, 4 days of vigilante justice, 4 days of people, black and white, fighting with each other. Finally comes to an end, but not after the damage has been done. This is Hoke Smith. And we'll just run right past him. So let's talk about the race riot. It lasts for essentially 4 days. And during that time, the coroner, who is the official recorder of death, how would you like to have that job? The recorder of death. He would determine the cause of death. He said that there were 10 African Americans and 2 whites killed during the race riot. In reality, there was probably closer to 25 to 40 blacks that were killed, and again, the 2 whites. He's accurate with that number. September 25th, well, by September 25th, black Atlantans had begun to fight back. And so the violence has escalated. And September 25th, the city leaders put out a call to end the violence. And the reason they do it is not because of the violence, not because of the people that have been killed, the people that have been hurt, the property that's been damaged. The reason they do it, it's making us look bad. Atlanta's supposed to be a modern, thriving, progressive city. And the rest of the nation is looking at us and they're getting a bad idea. We need to stop this. Had nothing to do with the violence. It all had to do with appearances. And so the riot eventually comes to an end, but the damage has been done. And probably the worst damage is not physical. It's the deaths were a tragedy, but that's not the worst thing that happened. The worst thing that happened is that the black community in Atlanta began to think we cannot possibly coexist with the white community of Atlanta. And so the black community in Atlanta almost becomes a closed community. And in fact, we visited, the MLK Center, we visited Ebenezer Baptist Church. All of those are located on Auburn Avenue. And in fact, that area is known as Sweet Auburn. And that was the heart of the black community in Atlanta. And it thrived. After 1906, it actually thrived even more because you had black banks and black businesses that are created and catered to black folks. So I think that's the worst thing that came out of it, is there's now this feeling of mistrust between black and white. And until this point, things had run pretty smoothly. It gets better. Atlanta becomes known as the city too busy to hate. And if you think about it, Martin Luther King Jr. is assassinated in 1968. Was there a big riot in Atlanta in 1968? Because Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated? No. And that had a great deal to do with the city leaders, both white and black, churches, both white and black, saying, whoa, that's not what Dr. King would have wanted. But in 1906, there is no Dr. King. And the result is a mess. All right, this is Colin. Sorry, but you got to watch Colin this morning. But you get 10 minutes to stand toward the end. All right, so what percentage of Atlanta was black in 1906? 40%. That's a pretty big minority. And you can see, I think you can see how this thing escalated when you have that many people involved, how it escalated into what it did. And again, one of those dark, dark periods in Georgia history. And we'll see some more today as well, unfortunately, because sometimes folks just don't know how to behave. All right, so here's a couple of newspaper headlines. This one's not too bad, you know? Negro attempts to assault Mrs. Mary Chafin near Sugar Creek Bridge. But then, angry citizens in pursuit of black brute who attempted assault on Mrs. Chafin, rescued from friend by passing neighbor. That one is meant to inflame, to worsen things. And in reality, as far as we can tell, nothing happened. It was just something that was fabricated by the newspapers. Why? Stir up, but also to sell newspapers, right? Unfortunately. There's that horrible picture. All right. So probably the most infamous, not going to say famous, but infamous lynching involving a white man is the Leo Frank case. Leo Frank was a Jew. And this case involved anti-Semitism, one of your vocabulary words, which is simply hatred toward Jews. In the early 1900s, this has become a source of conflict, not just in Georgia, but really around the world. But this particular case happens in Georgia. 1913, it's April. A little girl named Mary Fagan, little girl, she's 13. To me, that's a little girl. So some of y'all are still little girls. Don't be offended by that. But Mary Fagan, she's 13 years old. She works at the National Pencil Factory. Makes pencils. Okay? That's her job. She's 13. She works because her family needs her to work. She's not going to school, at least not full time. She is working at the National Pencil Factory. Well, on Saturday, April the 27th, 1913, it is Confederate Memorial Day. And so Atlanta is decked out in Confederate flags. There's veterans wearing their Confederate uniforms. There are parades. There's food. There's party. It's just a grand day in Atlanta. And Mary Fagan is looking forward to celebrating that day with her family. But before she does, she goes to the National Pencil Factory to get her paycheck. There's nobody at the factory but Mary, Leo Frank, a man named Jim Conley, and another young teenager named Alonzo Mann. Well, Mary Fagan is found dead in the basement. Yes. I think so. Yep. She is found in the basement, and as Shire said, she is covered with soot. She's covered with coal dust. Coal dust, I say. And because she is so filthy, you can't tell what race she is. Along with the body of Mary Fagan, there are 2 notes called the murder notes, presumably written by whoever killed Mary Fagan, left at the scene. Well, Leo Frank is the manager of the National Pencil Factory, and he is accused of murdering Mary Fagan. He has a reputation of sometimes making unwanted advances towards his female employees. Y'all get what I mean? And the theory was that he did that with Mary Phagan, and she turned him down, and it made him mad, and he killed her. That's the working theory. He goes on trial for the murder of Mary Phagan. And despite the fact that the star witness changes his story 2 or 3 times, and the evidence is fabricated, it's not real evidence, he is found guilty of the murder of Mary Phagan and sentenced to death. He is not killed by the state of Georgia. Governor John Slayton, on his last day in office, commutes the sentence of Leo Frank from death to life imprisonment. So Leo Frank escapes the electric chair, old Sparky. Here's Leo Frank. You think he did it? Just by looking at him? We'll see. He's Jewish, of course. He's German Jewish, but he wasn't born in Germany. Where do you think he was born? Where? No, he's not a Georgian. He was born in Texas, of all places.
So he's a Jewish German, but he's born in Texas.
He did not grow up in Texas. He actually grew up in Brooklyn, New York. Which is really highly unusual. To be born in Texas, to be raised in Brooklyn, and to be living in Georgia. People didn't do that in 1906. Most people were born and lived and died in the same town or the same city because you just didn't move very often. He's a highly educated man. He's a mechanical engineer from Cornell University. Had moved to Georgia to manage his uncle's pencil factory. Again, making wooden pencils. Mary Phagan's job, you want to talk about a boring job? Her job is to put the little metal sleeve on the end that holds the eraser. That's her job. Could you imagine 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, putting a little metal thing on the end of a pencil so somebody else could come behind you and stick a little eraser on the end of the pencil? That's what Mary Phagan did, out of necessity. Her family was poor. They were from Alabama, had moved to Marietta for job possibilities. So, Frank, again, he's a German Jew. He's German Jewish. That's his ethnic background. And is a very influential member of the German Jewish community in Atlanta. And that becomes part of the problem after he is convicted. He's accused of murdering Mary Phagan, and here's Mary Phagan. 13. She looks like she's 28. Nah, they're 2 bows. You got one in each quadrant or half. Leo Frank is convicted on August 25th, and I want you to notice something. April 27th, okay, Mary Phagan is killed. By April the 25th, Leo Frank has been convicted of her murder. That does not happen in today's world. If you're convicted of a crime, let's say Jude is finally caught and convicted of running over Sarah Kate with that taxi cab, he's not going to go on trial 4 months after that crime is committed. It's going to be a year. It might be 18 months. But in 1913, we got to do it. We got to do it quick. And so he is convicted at the age of 29 for murdering Mary Phagan. And of course, he's rich. But he's not able to buy his way out of it. So, We have the state versus Leo Frank. August 4th, 1913, Jim Conley, who was at the National Pencil Factory on that Saturday morning, testified that Leo Frank approached him and asked him to move Mary Phagan's body from his office to the basement. That's Jim Conley's testimony. And again, it changed 2 or 3 times. He asked him to move Mary Phagan and then had him write the murder notes. The only problem is Leo Frank is highly educated, right? And you would think he would know how to write. Jim Conley was not educated. In fact, Jim Conley claimed he was illiterate. He wasn't. But he wrote with poor grammar, poor syntax, poor handwriting. And the jury believed him. And one of the I guess it's ironic, I guess that's a good word to use, things about this is Jim Conley is a black man. And so here in the state of Georgia, for the first time ever, you have a white man convicted based on the testimony of a black man. Why did that happen? Had Leo Frank been a Christian, would he have been convicted? He's Jewish. And apparently, the hatred of the Jew was greater than the hatred of the black. That's hard to imagine in Georgia in 1906. Leo Frank's defense is that Jim Conley's lying. I'm innocent, Jim Conley's lying, and he tells his story. He's still found guilty. And he's sentenced to death in the electric chair in Milledgeville, Georgia, on October the 10th, 1913. Old Sparky was at the old state penitentiary out by Walter B. Williams, that big red brick building that's no longer there, torn down a couple of years ago. So the verdict is he's guilty. An appeal is made, and as long as his appeals are alive, he cannot be executed. And so in 1915, John Slayton is the governor. He is leaving office, and he makes the decision to commute or to change Frank's sentence from death to life. And so he's transported to Milledgeville, and he's placed in the state prison. John Slayton believed in Frank's innocence based on the testimony, based on the evidence. But he was also afraid of losing his office, and he was afraid of the anti-Semitic mob. And so he waited until he was leaving office, the very last day, and he commutes Frank's sentence. He doesn't turn him loose, even though he probably should have. He just changes his sentence from death to life imprisonment. This is what he said. I can endure misconstruction, abuse, and condemnation, but I cannot stand the constant companionship of an accusing conscience which would remind me that I, as governor of Georgia, failed to do what I thought to be right. It means that I must live in obscurity the rest of my days, but I would rather be plowing in a field than to feel that I had had that blood on my hands. That's a pretty powerful statement by John Slayton. And he knew he was committing political suicide. He would never again hold office in the state of Georgia. He would be lucky to be elected dog catcher, because that was not wanted by the people of Georgia. Another person that we've talked about becomes involved in this, Tom Watson, leader of the Populist Party, who actually pushed for black and white farmers to work together, to unify, even though he also pushed for the black voter to be disfranchised. He pushed for unity among the farmers. And he's a hateful man. He really is. Even though he does some good things, creates the Rural Free Delivery Bill, he wants Leo Frank to be executed from day one. He did it. I know he did it. Everybody knows he did it. Let's just get it over with and kill him now. He writes in his newspaper, The Jeffersonian, "Our grand old Empire State has been raped." That's a pretty strong statement, isn't it? "Jew money has debased us, bought us, and sold us, and laughs at us. Hereafter let no man reproach the South with lynch law. Let him remember the unendurable provocation, and let him say whether lynch law is not better than no law at all." That's in June of 1915. What's he asking for? What does he want to see happen? Huh? How? He's asking for Leo Frank to be lynched. And even after Frank is dead, Watson continues to push his anti-Semitic views. So much that in the fall of 1915, a group of men meet on the top of Stone Mountain. They burn a cross and they rebirth the Ku Klux Klan. Oh, stop it. We know what that is. So, the trial takes place. Frank's sentence is commuted. And in September of 1915, September 16th to be exact, a group of men who call themselves the Knights of Mary Phagan break into the prison in Milledgeville. How do you break into a prison? Oh, they break into the prison. They really don't break in. It had been long thought that they had some help from the inside. And just a couple of years ago, Georgia history teacher from Atlanta, the Atlanta area, was surprised by one of her students. One of her students brought a keychain, a key ring. And they were old keys, and this particular student knew that the teacher collected antique keys. And she was excited. Yeah, thank you very much, blah, blah, blah. And she noticed that on the key ring there was a brass disc that had the name of the warden of the state prison in Milledgeville, Georgia on it. They were his prison keys. He had lost them. And so those keys are now in the Bremen Museum up in Atlanta. And so we know they had help. In fact, they knew exactly where Leo Frank was. He was actually in the prison hospital at the time. Somebody had tried to slit his throat. And they did hurt him, but they didn't kill him. So he was in the hospital recovering from that. And those men come, they take him, they bind him, they throw him in a car, and they drive him to Marietta, Georgia, and they lynch Leo Frank. And it is from that action and that group that the Ku Klux Klan is reborn in 1915, the fall of 1915. So Leo Frank is lynched. And you would think the story would be over, but it's not. There's much more. Here's Leo Frank, Mary Phagan. She got some big old bows. Got a big bow head. State prison farm in Milledgeville, and it actually was a working farm. If you lived in the prison, you worked in the farm. And that's how you ate. You grew what you ate. Here's the infirmary. This is where Frank was being housed at the time because, again, someone had attempted to cut his head off, slit his throat. Atlanta Constitution the day after, mob takes Frank from jail. Prisoner rushed from State Farm in an automobile. And this is the end result. Here's you can see the crowd gathered around. Here's Leo Frank. Here's a close-up of Leo Frank after he has been lynched. This was a postcard. Couldn't you imagine getting that in the mail? Mom, I got a Oh. And it was actually brought to me by Caden Lloyd, found it in his grandmother's house. And this person right here with the kind of pot belly and the straw hat, that is a relative of Caden. That's how his grandmother got that. So you never know what you'll find in your family background. So if you're not willing to find the ugly stuff, don't go looking. Huh? Because his neck's been broken. His neck's been broken. Yeah. So, I said the story's not over. For 70 years, members of the Jewish community, civil rights groups had preached that Leo Frank had been wrongly convicted, that he was indeed innocent. 71 years after he is convicted and sentenced to death, after his death actually, a man comes forward. He's an old man. His name is Alonzo Mann, a man named Alonzo Mann. He had been a young teenager about Mary Phagan's age when she was murdered, and he saw the whole thing. Alonzo Mann is at the National Pencil Factory, and Jim Conley sees him. And Jim Conley tells him, if you tell anybody, I will kill you, I will kill your mama, I'll kill your daddy, I'll kill everybody in your family. You're 13 years old, and a grown man tells you, you tell anybody and I'll kill you. Do you believe him? Of course you do. But Alonzo Mann went home and told his mom anyway. And his mom said, we're saying nothing. This never happened. And as Alonzo Mann is nearing the end of his life, he finally feels like it's time to unburden his soul. And so he goes to officials in the state and tells them what he saw. And it was enough for the Georgia Board of Pardons and Paroles to give Leo Frank a pardon. They didn't declare him innocent, they just gave him a pardon. And that's probably as much as we're ever going to get from a case that's that old. But Alonzo stated that Jim Conley killed Mary Phagan and then hid her body. People still debate. If you ever go to law school, if you want to be a lawyer and you go to law school, this is a case that you will talk about. Because we don't actually know what happened. Okay? Only 3 people truly know what happened. Mary Phagan, Leo Frank, and Jim Conley. And Conley and Frank didn't agree. And Mary Phagan wasn't talking. Okay? So that brings us to this lovely case. This is probably the most infamous lynching in American history. Emmett Till. He's 14 years old in this picture. He's still 14 years old. And I'm going to let Stan tell you. We're going to run about 10 minutes over if that's okay. Because this is worth watching. You'll find out. Just chill. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.